Appreciate you being here tonight. Looking forward to the time we have together as we open the Word of God. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. That's how the book begins in our Bibles, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Several years ago, I had an opportunity to teach on this book, and it really provided a motivation to me to go back through and to try to just to think again about every aspect of this book. And I read the book a good bit. It's not a long book, by the way, and I appreciate those who took me up on my suggestion to read it in preparation for this class, for this study, I should say. It takes about 15 minutes to read the book. It's not long. It takes a little longer than that maybe to feel like you got a handle on it, if you're new to it. Anyway, in reading that book over and over again, I also committed myself to reading about the book. And I read a number of works about the Song of Solomon. Some were helpful, some were not. But one thing that I found repeatedly in the introduction to one commentary after another were words like this. Quote, "No book of the Bible has been so inaccessible to the ordinary reader, none so walled about, matted over, and hidden by tradition as the Song of Songs." Here's another. "Of all the books of the Old Testament, none is so difficult to interpret as the Song of Songs. About no other book has so much been written, and concerning no other book has there been such difference of opinion and such a variety of interpretations." Here's another. "There does not exist another book which has inspired so many diverse and contradictory interpretations as those which have been assigned to the Song of Songs." Here's another. "Although a survey of the history of interpretation of the canticle, the Song of Solomon, would require the lifelong labors of a team of scholars." Wow, and I could go on. How encouraging. You know, if somebody read that, they'd be tempted just to close the book and quit. And I think that happens sometimes. But I'll tell you something you already know. The Holy Spirit included this book in the Bible for a reason. And there's a blessing in it. And I don't think God gave us any book that is inaccessible to reason. There are some books, some writings of the Bible more difficult than others. We all know that to be true as well. And I can certainly empathize with those who find this book difficult. I still have questions. But I have come to this realization that one of the reasons why this book seems so difficult to me is because I have failed to learn the lesson of the very first verse. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. That's how it reads, isn't it? The first thing we learn about this book is it is a song. This book is a book that reflects the nature of Hebrew poetry. That's a subject a lot of folks know a lot more about than I do. But even a guy like me can understand there's a difference between a narrative, a straight history, and a song. Is that not fair? I always think of maybe this is a simpler way of understanding the difference between narrative and song or poetry. If I turn back over to the book of Exodus chapter 14, I can find in Exodus both of those in reference to a historical event. You find in Exodus 14, Moses giving the account, the history by inspiration of God, of the escape of the Jews from the army of Pharaoh there at the Red Sea. Beginning in verse 21. "And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground. and the waters were a wall under them on the right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch of the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, and they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, and upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared. And the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all Pharaoh's host that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. That's the history. That's the narrative. If you look in chapter 15 of Exodus, you find here the account of what we call the Song of Moses. Here's the same event told in poetry. Let's pick up in verse 8. And with the blast of thy nostrils the waters were gathered together. The floods stood upright as a heap. The depths were congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My lust shall be satisfied upon them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. Thou didst blow with thy wind, and the sea covered them, and they sank as lead in the mighty waters. A little different, isn't it? You know, it's not one is true and one is not. It's just simply there's a difference between a narrative and a song. We know that from uninspired writings, do we not? I don't know why I chose this song. I suppose it was at some point when I was putting these charts together, somewhere I was and I heard this song playing on maybe in a store or elevator somewhere, some easy listening music pumped in. There was a song back in the 1970s, okay? And I'm not an aficionado on that kind of music, and maybe nobody even knows this song, but there was a song put together by some group out in California, Bread, I think it was. And it was a song about a diary. I found a diary underneath the tree and started reading about it. I don't know if anybody remembers that song or not. But it's a song about this guy, and he's sweet on this girl, and he happens to see her diary there, laying there. So he picks it up and begins to read it. And he's so encouraged because she's so in love with this fella until he realizes after he reads a while, he's not the fella. And that hurts his feelings. And but he wishes them well and all this. Anyway, that's the song. And I thought, you know, how foolish would it be for me in hearing that song to ask the question, well, what kind of tree was it that you found that? I don't know. It's a song. As far as I know, it may have been a true story, but the song doesn't include. Well, where was the tree? It doesn't say where the tree was. It's a song. It's a song. Well, what was the name of that girl? He doesn't mention the name of either one of them. It's a song. And it may be a song about a true story, but we don't expect a song to read like a police report. You ever read a police report? So-and-so came out of his residence at 1326 Thomas Avenue, got into a white sedan, drove 6 blocks south on. That's the way a police report reads. A song doesn't read like that. And my point is this, that when I'm looking at this song, it's not fair for me to expect it to follow along like a narrative or like a police report. One of the things that discourages readers, I know what discouraged me when I first began to try to read it is, it's sometimes hard to even know who's talking. And it's sort of hard to know, what, and it seems like that this is not just a linear history of this is Tuesday, this is Wednesday, this is Thursday. I think if I understand the book correctly, there's a good bit of going back and forth. And sometimes it seems rather obvious that here are these two parties, and they seem to be very intimate, and then the next little bit they seem to be at odds. And, well, I tell you the real problem is it's a song. And I'm expecting it to be something besides a song. I don't mean it's not true. I think that the song deals with events that happened, but it doesn't tell it as a narrative. It tells it as poetry might picture it, as just a secular song might picture it. So that's number one. I need to remember that this is a song and to not expect it to be something that it's not. In the second place, he tells me in the very first verse, this is not just a song, it's the song of songs. I read to you a moment ago, there are people who are very critical of this song. There have been those through the years who have said, well, I just don't know why this is in the Bible. There might be some brethren who will wonder about that. And I've already confessed to you, I'm ashamed that I've neglected this book in many ways. I've taught lessons from it, but I think I've done an extremely poor job of representing this book and really letting it do the work that God intended for it to do. I'm an old guy now, but I'm going to try to do better in years that come ahead, whatever they might be. But there's the question of whether or not it's a great song has already been answered. I've thought about this illustration before. You know, if you were going to school somewhere, and maybe you were studying English literature or American literature. Let's take American literature. And suppose you were in an upper level class. A professor might handle the class this way. He might say, all right, class, this quarter, I want you to all buy a copy of, and you can insert whatever great American novel that you have in mind. I'm not a big fiction reader, but maybe it's Moby Dick, Herman Melville. Now, the professor will say, your grade this quarter will be based upon a test that will consist really of this. I want you to read the novel and read it again and read it again and answer this question in essay form. Why is this novel maybe the greatest American novel in American literature history? He didn't say, I want you to tell me if you think it's a great novel. What he's asking, what he's testing you on really is, do you know enough about literature to appreciate why this is great? And if you do, then I'll be the judge of that, and then I'll give you a passing grade. And if you don't, then you don't know enough about literature to get my stamp of approval. That's the way he might handle that. By the way, I know the first time I read Moby Dick, I didn't know what in the world was going on either. I thought it was a silly story. I'm not sure I've still got a handle on it, but the more I've read it, the more I've appreciated, really there's a powerful message there that I didn't see at first. That's what this guy is trying to test you on. Are you able to see the greatness of it? Now, whatever you think about that. The Song of Songs is just that. It is the Shir Hashirim. The Greek, the asmaton, he repeats the word to suggest the superlative. It is the greatest. It is the, by the way, maybe you've read somewhere, it'll make a reference to this work and it will abbreviate it CANT, or it will refer to the canticles. That comes from the Latin. I don't know anything about Latin, but the canticum, canticorum. But you can tell in all of those foreign words the repetition of the word song, and that comes out in English. It's not just the song. It's the song of songs. It's superlative. Its greatness is there. And if I don't see it, the problem's on my end. That's where things get fuzzy, not in the work itself. So that'll help me to have, I think, a greater ambition to appreciate this work. Let me say something else about that, too, that occurs to us. If this is the Song of Songs, then whatever understanding I gain from it needs to be something worthy of being the Song of Songs. And I think there are many interpretations of this book that fall short of that. Whatever this book's about, it is a superlative. It is the highest. And that is also something that will help me as I'm searching for meaning here. I'm looking for something along that line. And the third thing that this first verse tells me, it's the song of songs, it's the song of songs which is Solomon's. We expect this to have Solomon in the picture. I mentioned I read a few books through the years about this book. This one in particular, the message of the Song of Songs, by this fellow. It's, it's maybe a couple of 250 pages or so. All these books have a long introduction, which is fine. But in the introduction, he calls an orientation to the song. I won't bore you with a lot of this, but just listen to this if you would. He says, questions concerning the role of Solomon in the song are, along with the date, the authorship, are inextricably intertwined, he writes. Solomon is mentioned in the song 7 times. That is true. And then he points out how that the king, quote unquote, is mentioned another 3 times. He says the title, literally translated, the Song of Songs, which pertains to Solomon. And right there you're getting an idea that he may have a little different view about this. And he says, well, while there is the possibility of Solomonic authorship, I think, he writes, that its most likely meaning is the Song of Songs attributed to Solomon. Okay? That is, a literary editor ascribed the song to Solomon as author, which then gave the poem status of being classified with the wisdom literature. On this view, no one knows who wrote the song. He goes on to the next paragraph to say, references to the king in 1:4, 1:12, 7:5, may well be simply a literary convention having nothing to do with Solomon. And I thought, boy, sure I'm glad I read this book. Because until this moment, I did not know that the Song of Solomon is not written by Solomon and has nothing to do with Solomon. Well, thanks for that. I don't believe that. This fellow's a smart guy. I'm sure he's got a higher IQ than I do, but I don't believe that. I don't believe that that's fair to the book itself. No, I think when you're dealing with the Song of Solomon, we certainly are expecting to read about Solomon. And what do we know about Solomon? Would you bear with me while I go back in a little background here? I promise we're going to move through the book at some point, but I just think there's some groundwork that's good for me to lay down. What do you know about Solomon from the Bible? Well, I know that he was called the beloved of the Lord. He came out of that union. He was the second son born to Bathsheba of David. But when you go back to 2 Samuel chapter 12, he was called Solomon, which means peace, and he was also called, you remember there's another name, Jedediah? What does Jedediah mean? It means beloved of the Lord. I think from his birth, Solomon was beloved of the Lord. I think God had special plans for him. I'm turning now to 1 Chronicles chapter 22, and in verse 6. And this is the time when David is told, you will not build the temple. David wanted to build the temple of the Lord, but David was not allowed to do that. But someone close to David would. This is 1 Chronicles 22:6. He called for Solomon his son, and he charged him to build an house for the Lord God of Israel. And David said to Solomon, my son, as for me, it was in my mind to build an house to the name of the Lord my God. But the word of the Lord came to me, saying, thou hast shed blood abundantly, thou hast made great wars, thou shalt not build an house unto my name, because thou hast shed much blood upon the earth in my sight. Behold, a son shall be born to thee, who shall be a man of rest, and I will give him rest from all his enemies round about. For his name shall be Solomon. And I will give peace and quietness unto Israel and his days. And he shall build an house for my name. And he shall be my son, and I will be his father. And I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. Now, my son, the Lord be with thee, David says to Solomon, and prosper thou, and build the house of the Lord thy God, as he hath said to thee. Only the Lord give thee wisdom and understanding, and give thee charge concerning Israel, that thou mayest keep the law of the Lord thy God. Then thou shalt prosper, if thou takest heed to fulfill the statutes and the judgments which the Lord charged Moses concerning Israel. Be strong and of good courage. Dread not, nor be dismayed. So here's Solomon, and he's the chosen. He's going to be the man privileged to build the house of the Lord. He's a man given charge by his father to keep the law. By the way, he was trained in the law. He knew the law. If you go back over to Deuteronomy chapter 17, one of the things we remember, before there was a monarchy, way back in the days when Moses was giving Israel charge before they ever went over into Canaan, there was consideration of a future monarchy. And you remember the instruction given there? This is Deuteronomy 7, verse 14. And when thou art come unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set a king over thee, whom the Lord shall choose, one among thy brethren, not a stranger, not a foreigner. Verse 16, he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt. By the way, I wonder if Solomon forgot about that part. He did. He forgot about some other things too. Verse 17, he shall not multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply for himself silver and gold. But you can't say he didn't know better. Look at verse 18. And it shall be, when he sits upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priest and the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to keep all the words of this law and the statutes, to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand, to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom. It wasn't just that Solomon was to read the law. It was that he was to make his own copy of the law, as every king was commanded to do. Solomon certainly knew the law. There are a couple of psalms that are connected with Solomon. One of them is Psalm 72. And if you have the English Standard Version, the title, I believe I'm right about this, the title for Psalm 72 says something like this, a Psalm of Solomon. But I don't believe that's correct. There are other translations, I think, that will properly read a Psalm for Solomon. And you may see the difference there. I don't think these are the words of Solomon. I think these are words given to Solomon, maybe by David, his father, before he died, as Solomon was the obvious heir to the throne. And the words read this way, give the king thy judgment, speaking, O God, and thy righteousness unto the king's son. He shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment. The prayer for Solomon was that he might keep God's righteousness in mind and that he might always follow that. Solomon was a man who was exposed to the Word of God. He knew it. He was reminded of it regularly. The other psalm that's connected with Solomon is 127, I believe. And in Psalm 127, you have the same thing, a song of degrees for Solomon. I don't think these are Solomon's words, but I think they certainly were directed to Solomon, and they bless us as well. What's he say here? He says, except the Lord build the house, They labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. Your only security is going to be found in holding close to God. But sadly, Solomon did not always hold to that law. He was a gifted ruler, and early on, things seemed so promising. Back in 1 Kings chapter 4, I think it was a golden age when Solomon first began to reign in Israel. And I'm sure there was a great deal of excitement and hope about the future. This is the description from the inspired historian, 1 Kings 4 and verse 24. And he had dominion over all the region on this side of the river, from Tipsah even to Azza, over all the kings on this side of the river. He had peace on all sides round about. And Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine, under his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. He had great peace and promise. Same chapter, verse 30. Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than all men. And then he mentioned several folks that we don't know, but they were famous in that day for their wisdom. But Solomon excelled them all. He spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He knew about science, botany, zoology. He was a brilliant man. He was a polymath, is I think the term they use. If there ever was one, he was the guy, an expert in whatever. I guess maybe the high point in Solomon's life is about the time that is recorded in 1 Kings chapter 9. He has been commissioned and has finished the temple of God. And in 1 Kings 9 and verse 1, it came to pass when Solomon finished the building of the house of God and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire which he pleased to do, that the Lord appeared to him the second time. And he said to him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication which thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever. Mine eyes and mine heart shall be there perpetually. In verse 4, notice here, and if thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and wilt keep my statutes and my judgments, then, and if then, I will establish thy throne and thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, there shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. But if ye shall all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes which I have set before you, go and serve other gods, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them. Now in verse 10, it came to pass at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the two houses and the house of the Lord and the king's house, then some things began to change. If you think about Solomon's reign as a 40-year reign, that's the number the scripture gives. I think about the first 20 years as, from the outside at least, looking like glory. But already, I think the rot had begun. I think that's one of the reasons why the Lord warned him so severely here, so carefully. And I think the last 20 years of his reign was anything but glorious as far as his spiritual condition is concerned. I think it started early in his reign. You go back to the 3rd chapter of 1 Kings, and you read there about what must have seemed like at the time a great diplomatic coup. Oh, this is wonderful news. And Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had made an end of building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall of Jerusalem round about. Some of you guys may have some of the commentaries written by James E. Smith. I think he was a member of the church. He wrote, on the Bible and some good stuff he wrote. He made a point in this passage about this passage that I copied down. He said, no other example has yet been found. I think he wrote his commentaries in the 70s or 80s. Has yet been found of a Pharaoh's daughter being given in marriage to a foreign royal house. I don't know, let's suppose that's true. Well, that's pretty high cotton, isn't it? I mean, here's Pharaoh, and he's the man, and Egypt is off and on always a great power, and here is Solomon. He's so smart. He's worked out this deal, and now he's married this foreign woman. He must have thought, man, I am great at this diplomacy thing. This is wonderful. But I think on some level, he knew that this was not according to the will of God. There was something off about it. If you turn back over to the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 8, there's a little note given by the inspired historian in 2 Chronicles 8, I think it is. In verse 11, notice this. And Solomon brought up the daughter of Pharaoh out of the city of David, unto the house that he had made for her. For he said, quote, my wife shall not dwell in the house of David, king of Israel, because the places are holy whereunto the ark of God has come. How about that? On one level, Solomon knew there's something about this doesn't smell right. This is not appropriate. But on the other hand, oh man, look how smart I am. By the way, you read all kinds of things about Song of Solomon. I've read some people who think that this Pharaoh's daughter is the woman in the Song of Solomon. No, that won't do. For a lot of reasons that won't do. I hope it'll become obvious as you read the book over and over again. But I think it's in chapter 14. 1 Kings, chapter 14. And in verse 21, 1 Kings 14:21 reads, and Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. Now, you know Rehoboam. He's the guy who's going to follow Solomon on the throne, his son. Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah, and Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord did choose out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah, the Ammonitess. What's the point? How long did Solomon reign? 40 years. How old was his son when he took over after the death of Solomon? 41 years. Maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe I'm reading something that's not there. It seems to me that Solomon had a son a year before he became king. And he was married to this woman. We know that he married Pharaoh's daughter after he became king. And this is certainly a long time after whatever's going on in the Song of Solomon. My point is, no, I don't think this was a love match. And I don't think this shows true devotion to one woman. That wasn't Solomon's story. But it's just a sign that early on Solomon began to acquire wives for political reasons. If you go back to, 1 Kings 9 and verse 4 we read a moment ago, 24, we read from this chapter earlier. Anyway, Pharaoh's daughter was taken out of the city of David for the reasons that we mentioned. But let me go to 1 Kings 11. That's what I want to look at. We all know this part of the story. 1 Kings 11 and verse 1 reads, but King Solomon loved many strange or foreign women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonians, the Hittites, of which nations concerning which the Lord had said to the children of Israel, ye shall not go in unto them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. It came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Solomon built an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise did he for all his foreign wives, which burnt incense and sacrificed unto their gods. It's a shocking story. I don't think that Solomon was an idolater from day one. But I tell you, while he was still a relatively young man, he was collecting these wives, one after another after another. And it had a far greater effect on him spiritually than he could ever have imagined. Solomon's story of apostasy and digression is well known, I think, to this audience. And there comes a point of reflection about all of that. And that's what we call the book of Ecclesiastes. I think Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes as an old man looking back on all those wasted years and all the mistakes and pain he brought to himself and to other people. You know, we sometimes think about David and his mistakes and his sins and Solomon's, and we think, well, they both messed up, and they both did, and they both paid a high price for it. But in some ways, we can say at least there's this difference. I think David's sin came out of lust. It came out of a moment of greed that overcame him and then that carried him. But when I think about Solomon's apostasy, I think about something that lasted for years and that came out of a rather cold, calculating spirit. When you read Ecclesiastes, it reflects a man who knew well what was right, but who decided in his heart, look, there's got to be something better, something more. I need to think out of the box, as we say. And so he did. And though he knew Jehovah, he had spoken with him. He said, I'm going to find my own way to happiness and fulfillment. And so I will search out. I will experiment with drugs, alcohol, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom. I'll experiment with these things, toy with it. And he sure did. And pushed many of these wicked things to the limit. And as an old man wrote about that by inspiration of God in Ecclesiastes to confess his foolishness. I think Ecclesiastes represents Solomon's repentance. I like to think his story ended better than it was for years. When he wrote words like this, Ecclesiastes 4:13, you may be poor and young, but if you're wise, you're better off than a foolish old king who won't listen to advice. Think he had somebody in mind there? Or Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 12. So I return to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that comes after the king? Only that which has already been done. And then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is gain in light than in darkness. I spent years thinking that, well, it all comes out the same. And I realized after I had paid the price, no, that's not true. In chapter 7 of Ecclesiastes, in verse 25, we were talking about this before service with someone here. Solomon wrote, I committed myself to understand, to learn, to search out for wisdom and explanations, to understand both the evil that is in foolishness and the stupidity that's in delusion. And I discovered for myself a bitterness that surpasses that of death. What? The woman whose heart is full of snares and nets, whose hands are chains of bondage. Whoever pleases God will escape from her, but the transgressor will be trapped by her. Verse 27. Look at this, says the teacher. Linking one thing to another, I've reached this conclusion. Among the things I seek but have not found, one man among 1,000 did I find. But I have not found one woman to be wise among all these. And I have discovered only this: God made human beings for righteousness, but they seek many alternatives. We know Ecclesiastes, and we can feel the pain of that. He's not the last one to look back with regret at wasted years. God be praised for his mercy, but it's painful to consider the mistakes that we've made. Solomon knew all about that. And we understand that's what Ecclesiastes is. But I believe that's what the Song of Solomon is too. And so before we close and pause the study for tonight, I want to share with you what I believe the Song of Solomon's about. I think the Song of Solomon is written about an earlier time in Solomon's life. But I believe that Solomon is writing about those years, those wasted years, when he was chasing after his own wisdom and failing to listen to God, and the price that he paid for that. We read a passage like Ecclesiastes 7, where he seems to have sort of a low opinion about women. Solomon was a misogynist. I've read that more than one time from some writers. Well, I don't think that's the point at all. I think what that does, it doesn't reflect on women as much as it does on the kind of women Solomon gathered, the kind of women that Solomon attracted. Who was he? He was the rich prince. Guess who that attracts? In many cases, especially if you're not discerning, it attracts people who are trying to use you just like you're trying to use them. That's the bitterness that he found through the years. But he knew, as an old man, how he had missed it. So you find passages like Ecclesiastes 5. This is what I have seen. It is good and fair for a man to take meat and drink and to have joy in all his work under the sun all the days of his life, which God hath given him. That is his reward. There is a life, even in this life, that finds fulfillment and joy, but only for those who trust God's way. In chapter 9, that passage that has so much to say about the hard road, that this world can bring you. He writes this: Go eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. And let your garments be always white, and let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love, all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. I tell you what he points to here is there's a better life if we follow God, and the first great gift that God gave man after life was Eve. It was woman. Back in Genesis chapter 2, and the Lord God said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a help meet for him. Later on in that same context, he reads, Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. That was God's arrangement. You want to be happy? This is the way you find happiness. One man, one woman committed to each other. Is that the story of Solomon? Is that how Solomon lived his life? Far from it. In verse 2, we'll talk more about verse 2 next time. We've got one whole verse, and that's great. But anyway, we're laying the foundation. I appreciate your patience. We're not going to be this long with this. But in the second chapter, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. There's a lot to say about that verse, actually. But I want to notice with you those pronouns when he talks about me and him. Who's the me? Who's the him? That's a fundamental. Who are the lovers in this psalm? And that is a fundamental question in understanding it. Well, I think the woman is obvious enough. She is only identified, she's not called by name. She's identified over in chapter 6 and verse 13 as the Shulamite. Now, there's some discussion about that, and where was this Shula? Is it the same as Shunem? A lot of folks think so. I don't know. I can't put a point on the map and tell you, but it seems to be a village that was up in the north of the country. She was a girl of the country. I don't mean that she was poor. They had vineyards. But she had been, in her youth, a keeper of her family's vineyard. She makes that point also. The big question comes up, who is the he, the beloved? Well, I believe that the text tells us it was a shepherd. Again, also unnamed. If you look in Song of Solomon 1 and verse 7, tell me, O thou whom my soul loveth, where thou feedest, where thou makest thy flock to rest at noon, for why should I be as one that turns aside by the flocks of thy companions? Now, people sometimes dismiss this idea, but it seems evident to me that her beloved is not a king sitting on a throne. He's a shepherd tending a flock. Now, we've already said that Solomon comes into the picture. Yes, indeed, he sure does. In fact, it seems to me, she is kept in the presence of Solomon in his house. Verse 4 of the first chapter, draw me, we will run after thee. The king hath brought me into his chambers. We will be glad and rejoice in thee. We will remember thy love more than wine, the upright love thee. What I understand to be going on here is that here is a Shulamite. And again, like a lot of songs, it doesn't give us all the details. We just have the general picture. Over in the 6th chapter, I think it is, we find a picture of this girl. She's out to look over the fruits of the vineyard. She, in verse 12, is taken up in the chariots of Aminadab. We'll talk about what that might mean. And the next thing you know, here she is in the presence of Solomon. This is not all told in order, but when you put all the pictures together, at some point she's taken up by Solomon. She is a prospect to be one of his wives. By the way, over in chapter 6 and verse 8, Solomon, complimenting her, says, quote, there are 80 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. My dove, my undefiled, is one. Now, some have said, well, these are wedding guests, or what? I don't. To me, the most natural reading is he's comparing her with the rest of his harem. How many has he got when this story takes place? That'd be, I think I'm bad at math, 140? Plus virgins without number. So he hadn't got to the 1,000 yet. He's on his way. You can just guess where this might fit in that period of time of his reign. But that's what Solomon sees. Solomon sees this girl who catches his eye for whatever reasons, and I'm sure a lot of it's physical. But she's not accepting his advances. Now, to his credit, he doesn't force her. I'll tell you what I'm sure he thought. I'm sure he thought she was crazy. You don't want to be with the king. That's what the daughters of Jerusalem, these other women thought. They thought, what's wrong with you? You're here in the presence of wherever she was taken to Jerusalem or some other palace. I can't be sure. The daughters of Jerusalem were there anyway. Maybe it was back to Jerusalem. Here you are in the midst of this glory and grandeur, and all you're talking about is some shepherd somewhere? This woman has lost her mind. But I tell you what Solomon realized as an old man writing about that time is, she wasn't out of her mind. I was out of my mind. He wrote so well in Ecclesiastes about the glory of living life God's way and all the joys that you have within the realm of what's right without the guilt and the consequences that come from doing what's wrong and chasing your own way, right? And I think the Song of Solomon, as I understand it, is specifically about the most glorious of all human relationships. The glory of romantic monogamy. One man, one woman, committed to each other. The great line from Song of Solomon is over in chapter 8, isn't it? Many waters, verse 7, cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, it would truly be condemned. A man like Solomon was not capable of understanding that. Solomon had 1,000 wives and never had one. He never understood what a marriage was to be, or the blessing of a marriage when you have two people doing it God's way. You know who did? This Shulamite did. I believe she's the central character of the story. It's a song of Solomon. I think Solomon wrote it. And Solomon's the character in the story. But he's not the hero of the story, not as I read it. He is instead, I believe, the man who, reflecting on his past life, mea culpa, he admits his faith. I'll share this with you quickly and then we'll close. When I first started preaching, and I'm just trying to figure out which end was up about this song, I began to ask people and say, well, do you have something you recommend, maybe a commentary or some help on the Song of Solomon? And one of the books that was recommended to me was a book by a fellow named Page Patterson. The back of this little, it's a really small commentary, the back of this little book has this quote: "Study the love and courtship of Solomon and the Shulamite bride." Many take this story to be the story of Solomon's honeymoon. Solomon finds his country girl, and they have little problems, but they all work it out, and that's the lesson we're supposed to, that's the hero, that's the lesson we're supposed to learn from. Study the love and courtship of Solomon and his Shulamite bride for clues to improve your own love relationship. At the same time, recognize how Solomon's love is symbolic or similar to Christ's love for his bride, the church. Let me get this straight. You're telling me that God chose Solomon to be the poster boy for monogamy? With all due respect to the many great students, smarter than I am, who hold a view like that, that will not do. That will not do. But I do believe this book is a blessing and a help to every man, every husband, every wife, and every young person thinking about marrying one day. And I hope to get some very specific points made from this book about the way we ought to think about marriage. Just like Ecclesiastes is largely written to young people. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. I think the Song of Solomon is written to help us all, but to tell young people, don't sell out to the world's standards and forget the blessing of marriage as God designed it. So we're going to spend a few Sunday nights thinking about the song, and I hope that it will be a blessing to you. Continue to read it, if you would, and we hope to say some things about it. If you have some questions, and I'm sure you will, if you want to share those with me, I'll be glad to talk with you, because it's a book that raises some questions, but it's also a book that's filled with blessing. All right, if you'd like to, you can take your songbook and turn to the number that Donald has selected. We're going to sing "Hark the gentle voice of Jesus falleth tenderly upon your ear." Don't neglect the voice of Jesus. And if it be your desire tonight to obey the gospel, or as a child of God to come back to Him if you've strayed from Him, let us know how we can help you even right now while we stand, while we sing.